Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's Strategic Scrutiny Committee. So we're moving into a different sort of scrutiny committee this evening. For those that have been following the scrutiny of the council, we're now kind of going back to a more typical scrutiny process. But of course, all these meetings are being taken virtually in accordance with the government regulations during the current coronavirus pandemic. It's lovely to see everybody. Before we start, I'd like to remind members of the following. Please can you make sure that you mute your microphones when not speaking, and we're getting much better at this, I think, all these months in. Please remain focused on the topic being discussed. Try to avoid repeating points which have already been made. Don't interrupt each other and respect the position of the chair, but we always have thus far. At the beginning of each item, I'll ask councillors who wish to speak on an item to indicate through the blue hand signals primarily, but then I'm more than happy for councillors to raise their hand physically, and we'll do our best to take a note of who's speaking or wishes to speak. Please remember that this meeting is being broadcast live on Facebook, so if you are not on mute, members of the public will be able to see and hear what you're saying, and please try and prevent any background distractions. And if you need to step away from the screen for any reason, make sure you stop your video feed. I know this is dinner time, so if you're eating your dinner, you might want to do it with the camera off. With all these matters in mind, can I ask Sharon Sissons, please, from Democratic Services, to do a roll call of councillors and officers so we can see who's here this evening. Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you, Chair. So can I ask councillors who are in attendance to state you are present when I call your name? Councillor Sills.
Present.
Councillor Newby.
Present.
Councillor Atkinson. I don't think she's present. Councillor Branston. I can't see Councillor Branston. Councillor Buswell.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hannaford.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor David Henson. You're just on mute, Councillor Henson. I can see you. You're still on mute, Councillor Henson, but I can see you're present.
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Councillor Lamb. I can't see Councillor Lamb. Councillor Diana Moore.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Jemima Moore.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Owen.
Present.
Councillor Packham.
So I've heard from Councillor Packham this evening. She's just currently finished off a meeting at work, but she'll be here as soon as she can. So don't put her up on Sharon, but she'll be with us shortly.
Lovely, thank you, Chair. May I just say we also have some portfolio holders in attendance who report to this scrutiny to respond to any questions from members under Standing Order 20 at item 6. So I can see Councillor Bialik. Would you just mind advising if you're present?
Present.
Councillor Pearson.
Yes, present.
Councillor Morse.
Present. Also, Councillor Atkinson has suffered a family bereavement recently, so I imagine she's sending her apologies this evening.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for that. Councillor Wood.
Present.
Thank you. There are other portfolios who could have attended, Councillor Sutton and Fole. And just to ask for officers who are in attendance, Director Finance David Hodgson.
Present.
Thank you. Director Net Zero Exeter and City Management David Bartram.
Present.
Growth and Commercialisation Manager Victoria Hatfield.
Present.
And myself, Sharon Sissons, and Mark Devon as Democratic Services Officers. Thank you very much. We are quite to proceed with the meeting, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sharon. So the next item of business is to approve the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 19th of November 2020. Before I ask if everyone's happy to approve those, does anyone wish to raise any comments on those minutes? Okay, then can I have a show of hands, please? All those in favour of agreeing they're a true and accurate record of the meeting?
Thank you, Chair.
So I think that's all members.
All of the committee members, yes, thank you,
Thank you very much.
that are present.
I look forward to signing those minutes in the future. I keep saying that. I wonder what year I'll get to sign the minutes physically. Soon, hopefully. So the next is agenda item 3, declarations of interest. If members have any disclosable pecuniary interests that relate to business on the agenda that haven't already been included on the register of interest, please can you declare those before any discussion takes place. And we move to item 4, which is part 2 items. So there's no need to exclude any members of the public or press from this meeting because there are no part 2 items. So we move to item 5. Questions from the public, understanding order 19. Again, there have been no questions submitted from the public, which is a shame. I always like to have questions from the public if they're submitted. So, members of the public, this is your opportunity to come and scrutinise councillors. It's nice to see it used, but that's fine. Item 6 is questions for members of the council, understanding order 20. The members are invited to ask questions of portfolio holders who report to this scrutiny committee. And I understand that Democratic Services, as they always do ask all members if they'd like to. And we have several portfolio holders here. So I'm sure you're familiar with the points of Standing Order 20. But because we're going back to this usual style of meeting, I'll just go through them. So councillors may ask an executive member with relevant portfolio holders any question on any matter for which the scrutiny committee has powers, duties and responsibilities. One supplementary question shall be allowed in relation to the subject of the original question. So councillors can't really go off on other tangents. It has to be related to the original question. Every question shall be put and answered without debate. And as ever, if portfolio holders can't respond in the evening, then a written reply will be given. I believe I only have one submitted question, and this is from Councillor Diana Moore, and Councillor Bialik will be responding. So over to you, Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Councillor Stills. In October 2019, I submitted the following scrutiny proposal: to set up a task and finish group to develop a framework for the council, setting out its approach to consultation and engagement. Such a framework might include setting out the meaning, purposes and principles of consultation, engagement and any other methodologies the council intends to use, what the council and contributors might expect from participation in such processes, how and what decisions may be influenced by such contributions or participation, and where and when those decisions will be taken, and how contributions will be analysed, and how feedback to contributors and the public will be given. When will this matter be put to scrutiny by members? Thank you.
Councillor Bialik.
Thank you, Chair. There are no plans to have a specific task and finish group for this matter. A paper will be coming to the executive in our meeting in February, which in turn will go to the meeting in the 23rd of February. There is every intention to bring forward a proposal in that document to discuss consultation and how we will consult. That paper will be available 7 days before the executive, and of course statements can be made on the matter at the executive on the night, and indeed further questions can be tabled at the full council meeting on the 23rd. But I would suggest Councillor Moore and other councillors actually wait for that document. I think you will see in that document we intend to consult quite widely and appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bialik. Councillor Moore, have you a supplementary question for Councillor Bialik?
So can you just clarify what you've just said? I couldn't hear very well. You're going to bring a paper to the executive on consultation, which will then go to council, and you're going to consult on that proposal.
No.
After that.
No. In actual fact, you didn't hear me say that.
And that's why I wanted to check. I couldn't hear you very well.
Let's be clear. We will be bringing a paper which will deal with on how this council consults if there are appropriate groups and organisations and how we will do that consultation process. That paper will be coming to the Executive Committee on the 9th, I believe it's the 9th of February. Obviously, it will be distributed to councillors and the public a week before in accordance with the council, and obviously statements can be made to that executive meeting, and also questions can be put at the 23rd. So there's always an opportunity for further discussion around that, and I would wait and have a look at that paper. You won't be too disappointed, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Moore, I'm going to be generous here because you couldn't actually hear the question. Would you like a supplementary question?
Only in as much as it would be rather ironic to bring forward a paper on consultation without consulting with members and the wider public. So I would look forward for an opportunity for some active feedback on that proposal, because the process as it stands doesn't allow for active scrutiny of that. And I would really, and I'm sure we both share this ambition, Councillor Ballock, to enable something to work well in terms of how consultation works. So I would ask you to consider that before you bring your paper to the executive. Thank you.
Okay, just to respond, I can assure Councillor Moore, indeed all the councillors, that this council always wants to consult and listen. And as you know, it's not a question of U-turns on many occasions, even on the night of the executive and indeed the night of the full council. We have always been prepared to have amendments to change recommendations on reflection of anything. And if there is anything for us to reflect upon, we will. I can give you that undertaking. So what I would say is you've got a couple of options here, Councillor. You can wait for the document to come out, store up your remarks for the executive, and store up your questions to come out on the 23rd of February. The other way of dealing with it is, as soon as you see the document, you've got something to say about it, email me or telephone me or whatever, get in contact me through your leader or yourself as deputy leader to raise any concerns with me, and if appropriate, we can deal with it in that way. So what I'm trying to say is we're always prepared to listen to any good ideas. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Barlick and Councillor Moore. So we move on to the next item on the agenda. And just to briefly set the context of this, you'll recall that during the COVID-19 crisis, the format for this committee had changed. It was a report from portfolio holders on the respective issues and work. And last year, we essentially decided to go to a more Q&A style scrutiny with portfolio holders on the COVID crisis. And as last year's scrutiny, we were given the opportunity for the committee to look at the budget report that was reported to executive on the 12th of January in more detail. And for this meeting, the Scrutiny Programme Board suggested that there should be a focus on recovery work in terms of the pandemic and links to the budget. So other budget reports are going to a forthcoming customer focus scrutiny meeting on the 11th of February. And the comments we make this evening and the comments from that scrutiny committee will be put forward in the agenda pack for consideration at council on the 23rd of February. So please bear that in mind as we move to agenda item 7. Before I do that, could I just ask Councillor Henson to mute, please?
Yeah, it's okay. I'm just moving around for a moment.
Yeah, I can hear you doing that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, hang on. Hang on.
Thank you. So I'm aware the title of this agenda item might seem a bit hasty. The city centre recovery update. I'm well aware we seem to be very much in the eye of the storm in terms of coronavirus. However, I hope all councillors will agree after reading the report that you can find on agenda page 13 of the agenda pack that Victoria Hatfield has put forward a really comprehensive and interesting read for us in terms of where the city is currently at where it looks like it will be going in the future in terms of the city centre. And I know these concerns are shared around the country, really, around the future of the high street and how cities will move on from this pandemic. So before we kick off, and I know Victoria, and we've got David Bartram here as well, director, to kind of set some context and talk to the report. We should just take note that we know we're not at the end of the pandemic, we're very much in the middle of it, but I think it's really important to take a look at what plans the council have made for the months going ahead. With that, I'm going to hand over to Victoria and David. I imagine you're going to probably do a double act to introduce the report and highlight anything you wish. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm flying solo tonight, unless David pops in later on, but I'll go through the report. So this is an overview of information and data that I've been collecting since restrictions were put in place spring 2020. It seems such a long time ago, but that time has just flown by. So myself and another member of the team, we meet with the Exeter Chamber of Commerce, Exeter Federation of Small Businesses, and in Exeter, which is the City Centre Business Improvement District, on a weekly basis. And that is to discuss any issues and challenges businesses are facing as a result of COVID-19 restrictions. But more recently, coming into that is issues and challenges around the impact of Brexit on the city centre, and, well, not the city centre, the city as a whole, and the business community. And these discussions have helped inform recovery plans and in developing business support activities, and more on that later. So I'm just going to take you through the update itself. If you read the report in isolation, you would think that Exeter is not doing very well. And yes, this is the case, that businesses and residents are struggling with the effects and impact of the pandemic, and with Brexit on top of this, it's a really extremely challenging time for all. And, you know, it's just to kind of highlight that is not an underestimation. It is a challenging time out there for all. But when you look at data that comes out from national organisations, or if you compare Exeter to other places, we're not doing too bad comparing to other places. One of the information that I tend to look at on a regular basis is the website Centre for Cities, and they issued their latest High Street Recovery Tracker, and Exeter is within the top 10 cities for footfall recovery, with the economy of the city being classified as moderately strong. So this bodes well for the city and for the recovery of the city and for those businesses dependent on the city centre. So just going on to the first point, which is onto high street trade, you can understand the decline and increases in different types of retail spend due to the restrictions that are put in place nationally, especially on non-essential shops, such as the 29% reduction in clothing and an increase on online shopping. The impact of home and flexible working represents one of the major challenges for the city centre going forward. The Exeter Chamber of Commerce did a business survey in December, and 65% of respondents reported a shift to home working. The office market within the city centre is a really important market for the city. The lunchtime market and just straight after work is really important to the city centre, and a lot of businesses are reliant on this trade. Just going on to shop opening and closures, I've kept a running total of shop opening and closures in the city across Exeter since March last year. And I've picked up there have been 45 shop closures with 15 shop openings. The shop openings is reassuring because it shows that there's still an appetite for investment in the city within Exeter, and especially within the city centre. The majority of those new shop openings are within the city centre. This is not the case for all of the places. Not all places are seeing new shop openings. So again, this is reassuring to the city, and this will provide employment for those that have sadly lost their job throughout the pandemic. Onto car parking, and when you look at this section and especially the chart, you can really see that when national restrictions are announced, there is a reduction in the number of people parking in Exeter City Council owned car parks. I don't have the data for privately owned car parks, this is just Exeter City Council. Obviously, this has a knock-on effect for those visiting the city centre, whether that be for shopping, a leisure trip, to study or for work. The large number of people working from home is having a negative impact on car park, and this also then results in a reduction in car park income. In line with the number of car park tickets sold, you will see that footfall has decreased as well, and it has increases in line with national restrictions being enforced and being lifted. And the two charts, there is some real similarity between them. There are a few small changes related around footfall, and this is primarily attributed to the University of Exeter students, whether they be self-isolating or leaving early for their Christmas break, and as well as Exeter College finishing early and then when they come back. It's just to kind of reiterate that students have a hugely positive impact on the city centre in terms of footfall and spend within the shops, pubs and restaurants. On to point 5, which is job vacancies. Job vacancies reduced during December. This isn't alarming. This is a normal seasonal change. When I look at historical data, this is a normal seasonal change. And looking at January figures, these have dramatically jumped up. So again, I'm quite reassured that this is a normal trend that we have. The figures in the report don't include those posted through recruitment agencies or direct via businesses. So vacancies overall tend to be much higher within the city centre. And nationally, when we're looking at what's happening across the city centre, the trend is that job postings are increasing, but on a temporary contract. So there is still some uncertainty from the business community of making that long-term commitment. And just on to point 6, which is universal credit claimants. The number of claimants within Exeter has risen dramatically. And again, this is across England. Exeter is not unique in that. And these tended to be when national restrictions took effect. Even though the figures in Exeter, they're at the highest they have been since August 1996, the percentage claiming universal credit is lower than the regional and national average. So when I spoke right at the beginning, that if you just look at the figures in isolation for Exeter, you think, oh my gosh, you know, what's happening? But when you compare it to what's happening or what's happening regionally, it's not as bad as what's happening nationally. We're keeping an eye on those that are aged 50 plus, as this is different to what's happening nationally and against regional trends. So we're just keeping a close eye on that. Those who are self-employed have been quite adversely affected by national restrictions, which has resulted in a number of them, unfortunately, having to claim universal credit. And again, this has had an impact on the numbers within Exeter. To support those who have been made redundant, we've set up Exeter Works, which is a joint project with Exeter Chamber of Commerce. This is working really well in supporting businesses and residents of the city, again, those who've been made redundant, either into training, into new employment, or if they want to set up their own business within the city. And just on to the final point, which is business support. To support businesses with recovery, a number of business support initiatives have just been finalised this week, and they're being funded through the City Council's allocation of the additional restrictions grant. I won't go into too much detail around Exeter Works because I've highlighted this just now. We do have 3 grants available, and we're just kind of toying with the idea, do we keep it as 3 grants or do we amalgamate it into one? And this is to support businesses wishing to diversify or introduce innovation or new equipment into their business to enable recovery. So this is specifically around recovery as a result of the pandemic. The next one is around digital business support, and this is there to enable businesses to adapt to digital ways of working to improve their business operations or processes, which could complement their bricks and mortar businesses, but it cannot result in their business closing down. And when I say closing down, I mean their business closing their doors in terms of closing their bricks and mortar businesses. We don't want businesses to just go online and then not have a presence on the high street. The final one around business support package is for SMEs, and this is dedicated one-to-one professional support to address identified needs to support recovery and transition, which will, form part of that business recovery, digital support, and that professional advice for an individual or a business with recovery. Pop-up shops is something that we're looking into, and this will use vacant Exeter City Council owned property, whether that be on the high street or elsewhere within the city. And it's to make space available for new business startups and to support micro businesses as well. If there's no vacant properties through our portfolio for Exeter City Council, it's about how do we work with private landlords on that, which will be a bit more challenging, but it's about addressing those vacant properties within the city. The aim of this project is to support new business startups and micro businesses. This will also link to the professional business support, which I mentioned earlier, to ensure that a new business survives going forward. Click and collect, this is about setting up or supporting an existing city click and collect facility or a net zero delivery service. And this is aimed at supporting small and independent businesses in the city that don't currently have that facility, whether it's a delivery or a click and collect facility. So that one is something we're currently working on. And lastly, on to temporary market. And this is to provide market space for new business startups, existing market traders, or micro businesses. And it's not there to detract away from the high street or a particular bricks and mortar building. It's not there for somebody to close their business to have a market space. This will be there to complement existing shops within the city centre. So under no circumstances will it look to duplicate what we already have there. We're looking at having something different every day. So say, for instance, it's a 3-day market. Each day would be different. So one day could be books, which would kind of link quite nicely with the UNESCO City of Literature status. Another day could be music, another day could be antiques, and another day could be food and drink. There'll be a focus on positive engagement around social environmental impact, and this will also link to the professional business support to ensure that, if it's a new business startup or a micro business, that they do survive the long term, and it's about supporting that new business and somebody into self-employment. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Before I bring in Councillor Pearson, who's a relevant portfolio holder, David Bartram, have you got anything to add as director?
Yeah, I was just going to, Victoria has taken you through the report in a very detailed way. I would just add some general context. This is in terms of emergency planning, this is a very strange incident. Normally in emergency planning, you would have the incident, so that would be a fire or a flood, for example, and that would be over in a relatively short period of time, and then you would deal with the impacts of that in terms of the recovery. This is very different. So we are still dealing with the incident in terms of the pandemic now, at the same time as trying to take steps towards recovery. So it's a very strange position to be in. So businesses out there are still very much dealing with the day-to-day terms of the incident, and we are now trying to help them with that immediate need, but also look to the future. So it is taxing. So just to put that into context.
Thanks, Dave. Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd like to say thanks to Victoria and Dave for their work on this. Firstly, I think you can see from Victoria's report the range of support that we're putting in place, but also we're doing on the back of the data that that you can all see about what is going on in the city and how that compares with other cities across the country. And I'd also like to say a really big thank you to all the businesses in Exeter for actually what they have been doing over the last several months. I think it's really important. I think we've all probably experienced it in our day-to-day lives, the innovation and sort of resilience of many of our businesses in terms of changing their business model in some cases, moving to delivery, or indeed moving a restaurant from an in-person service to takeaway. Whatever it is, there's been so much innovation from our businesses, and that I think is reflected in our relatively good performance as a city centre, but also across the city economy. Really just like to highlight Exeter Works, I think, has been a really good initiative and is working really well at actually engaging our existing businesses and individuals who have had difficulties during the pandemic to really put those together and build back better for the future in terms of jobs and hopefully future businesses that can be developed out of that. And I think the final point would be just around the business support schemes. Now, there's been several business support schemes already, and we've got new ones coming up in terms of business grants and the support measures in terms of Build Back Better. And I want to make sure that all businesses are aware of them and are really and feel enabled to apply for them. I think that's really, really important. If you haven't checked out Exeter City Council's website as a small business, please do. Please look at the grants and look at the support that's on offer, and think about how it can work for you, because it is there to make our future economy in Exeter better. And we look forward to working with you.
Thanks, Councillor Pearson. A really good report, and I've got lots of councillors down to speak. I currently have Councillor Henson, Councillor Moore, Councillor Hannaford. So we will go in that order. Councillor Henson.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just an observation to start with, and then a question. But the observation is on page 14, on new lets here, new buildings. I think the second one down is relocated from the High Street to Princess Hay, which is the French company, French cosmetic company, L'Artine or somebody. They were opposite Marks and Spencer's in the High Street. They've been there a long, long time, or a little while, and they've relocated now to Princess Hay. And my question is, on leases for pop-up shops, how long are these leases going to be?
Thank you, Councillor Henson. Yes, you are correct.
Victoria, thank you. Yes, sorry.
That's no problem. So yeah, L'Occitane, they were originally in the High Street. They closed down during the pandemic. I think they were just trying to kind of figure out, where they go. They needed a bigger premise, again, which is a good news story. They were looking for bigger premises within the city, and the unit came up in Princess Hay. So again, as part of that, that's quite a significant financial investment for them as a company wanting to be in the centre of the city. So, a great good news story related around that. For the pop-up shops, we're still working that out internally as to how long somebody would be in that. The concept of a pop-up shop, that it's a quick fire trial of somebody wanting to test, if they have a new product, say it's candles, they want to try it out. Is this product going to be something that somebody wants in Exeter City Centre? We would have that on a trial basis. So it's not a case of somebody being in there for 6 to 12 months and it's just a kind of a cheap fix for them. It's for them to go in, to try out, see if it works. If it does work, it's then how do we support them to get something a bit more permanent within the city, whether that's a market stall or whether that's another retail unit within the city centre or elsewhere within Exeter, whether that be Heathertree, Cowick Street or Topsham. It's trying to find a permanent base for them to try out an idea. So it's going to be short-term lets.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, can I just come back on something?
Yes, of course, yeah, very quickly.
Can I just come back on Ivy's, the restaurant in Cathedral Close? That really is a crunch for us. That's a brilliant, lovely restaurant. Very, very posh, very, very nice, very expensive, but very, very nice, and a real crunch for us, that one. Really good. Well done.
I think that one, it's a bit of a cherry on the top with that one. They've started working in the city centre now in terms of fitting out that unit and having that for the city throughout this pandemic. So, hoping that's quite soon when restrictions lift and, we can do a really push of that locally and regionally and, nationally as well.
Very good. Thank you. Really good. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and I'm sure we'll see both you and Councillor and Mrs. Henson in the window looking over the cathedral before.
I was going to ask Phil if he'd take us.
I'm sure Phil will take us all once this is all over. Councillor Diana Moore.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions, but I've alerted Victoria to what they are so I'll just go over them all in one go, if that's okay.
Of course.
Thank you. I'd just like you to expand, if you know a little bit about the impact of Brexit in terms of closure or impact on local businesses, and what is there any local support to help businesses cope with the changes, or do they have to wade through tons of government website? So the report was really, really interesting, and thank you for your hard work on that, and for the group that's been working on this. I'm just interested in knowing a bit more about, you know, the jobs advertised. Are we seeing it, particularly any changes in salary levels, particularly hourly rates? You know, are they good jobs? And I'm really pleased to see the temporary market idea, because, as you say, I think they create important social and environmental impacts. So strengthening local markets and providing infrastructure is really, really important for our local economy. So I'd like to know sort of what assessment you're going to be using to see if it's been successful, and in terms of these impacts, social and environmental impacts, and supporting new businesses, and whether this could be used to review whether it should become a permanent market. As it's such a significant idea, can you explain about your approach to building a number of an alliance approach to supporting this market, because I can see it being of great interest to different stakeholders in the city. Thank you.
I've been scribbling away, so I hope I've got over those. So the first one related around the impact of Brexit. I've been having discussions with businesses, whether they've come to me direct or whether it's from their local ward councillor, that businesses are having issues as a result of Brexit. That's tending to be more related around importing and exporting, the complexities around admin and evidence required when somebody imports or exports a product overseas. It is a challenge for businesses on top of what's been happening over the last 10 months. Resources available. A lot of this information, I've had a chat with a member of the team today related around this. The Exeter Works website has been specifically related around coronavirus and you know, how we support businesses and residents through that. But resources related around Brexit is going up on there now. The team members sent me all the information that's going up there just to read through it today. So looking at resources, the Heart of the Southwest Growth Hub, which covers Devon and Cornwall, is one of the main hubs for information for businesses to go to. So there's a huge area on their website for Brexit related resources. They also hold regular webinars to support businesses, whether it's around specific certificates that they need or new policies that need in place as a business. The BBFA, which is the Better Business for All initiative, is holding those webinars, and we tend to tweet about those through our social media accounts and our business newsletter. There's also Exeter Library. They hold a wide range of business events, and a lot of those are programmed in for the springtime, and they're there to support businesses through this difficult time. Some of them are more general business support events and webinars, but some of them are a bit more specific around pandemic and Brexit. So we do guide businesses to the Exeter Library in the BIPC section of that. It's a big wieldy website, but we do encourage businesses to do the self-check system on .gov.uk, because then you can see it's certain questions that you ask, and it gives you a wide range of advice of the types of certificates and what you need to do. You know, if you're a company that exports to the EU or exports to America, it gives you the requirements that you need to put in place to support your businesses. So the Growth Hub, the library, and .gov.uk are the main areas that we point businesses to, but we're also uploading a lot more content onto Exeter Works probably early next week. So the next one was related around the jobs, and let me just scroll to that section of the report. So job postings, as I mentioned, you know, we had a real dip in December, but I checked the figures. I check them every Friday, and we've had a real peak, a jump in those over the last 2 weeks, which is, again, it's really reassuring. The type of roles that tend to be advertised do tend to be consistent, and you can kind of understand why healthcare and nursing is top of that list because of the RD&E based within the city. HR recruitment, construction is always a regular one in the top 5, top 6, again, which is reassuring because that tends to be a good, stable job, even though we do have a lot of people who are self-employed within the construction sector. We do have different types of jobs coming through, such as digital, data and engineering type roles within the city. But again, reassuring that it's not just focused around healthcare and nursing. You know, the RD&E, they do have some sticky jobs that they struggle to recruit into. We have been working with them and the Job Centre and DWP to try and help them on those issues that they're having. Related around salary levels, I don't have that information in front of me, but I can get that to you, or I can send it to Sharon so she can include it in the minutes for it. So I can get that for you. Related around assessment of a successful market and kind of like what reviewing would be put in place and having to make it permanent and approaches to alliances and partnerships, I think absolutely a temporary market within the city centre wouldn't work if it was just, you know, the city council doing something on their own. It's about working in partnership, you know, whether it's around, you know, with Food Exeter or whether it's a wide range of community groups within the city. It needs to focus on something that people want in Exeter. There's no point doing something that, you know, somebody's not going to visit. And I think that was one of the key things around having it themed every day. It's not just the same thing every day. We want to encourage people, when it's safe to do so and restrictions lift, back into the city centre to, you know, support a new business startups through a temporary market, but also around that spend within the city centre. And I think that was one of the things I mentioned earlier around this, one of the stipulations for it. It's not going to be a replica or a duplicate of existing shops within the city centre. That's not going to support anybody going forward. In terms of reviewing it, it will be keeping a close eye on the number of stalls that we have on a regular basis. Part of the funding will be purchasing market stalls. The location has yet to be determined yet. We just kind of need to do some discussions with other officers within the city council as to where we're going to have this market within the city centre itself. Having discussions with the market holders, the stall holders as well, just to kind of understand, you know, how well is it going? Are you looking to work on a repeat basis? When I've been speaking to the officer that manages the farmers market within the city, a repeat booking from somebody that tends to kind of give the feeling that they're doing well, they're getting enough income to cover their costs of, you know, hiring the stall, paying for their raw materials, and for them to give them a wage as part of that. So for me, a success of it is actually somebody wanting to book a stall week in, week out. Around the market stalls, dependent on location, will be around the type of market stall that we get. You know, in an ideal scenario, it would be enough space to have something, whether it's a temporary structure, that we have stalls under something. So if it's a wet and windy day in Exeter, then, you know, the market stalls are kept dry and people visiting the market are kept dry as well. So we're just trying to work out how the logistics of where we have the space and how big we can go on this. Does that answer your questions? Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Victoria and Councillor Moore. Councillor Hannaford, I've got you down next. Then
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. 3 areas. I'm really encouraged by the work that you're doing around markets. I mean, historically, we've lost some covered markets over the years through sort of evolution and those parts of the city changing. But I still think, I come from Dartmouth originally, and we have 2 proper markets a week on a Tuesday and a Friday, including a pannier market, and those 2 days a week offer the opportunity for local producers and small businesses to actually bring something to the town that the existing retail units don't have. So I think that's really important. And I also think it's going to obviously offer up, hopefully, opportunities for people that have sadly lost their jobs in one way, but then perhaps can pursue it in another. I'd still like to see Bedford Square used for markets. I was here on the council when Princess Hay was being developed, so I'm one of the dinosaurs. So I remember the debates about it at the time, but I still nevertheless think that the farmers market where it is is good, but I think it could be better. And I think and I would like to see the farmers market hours extended. It's not always convenient for people to get there in the by the opening hours. And let us not forget as well, because of the changes elsewhere, that the operation at Matford, which I think was also a very good opportunity for local producers, was reduced. I think to describe it as a car boot was always a bit disingenuous, because there was always lots of people that from bringing in vegetables and organic produce, etc., that people perhaps that couldn't access the farmers market could actually use. So I hope you'll find a suitably spacious area for the markets that doesn't feel like it's just an add-on, and it can be a continuous thing. The second area is in regard to the people that have sadly lost their jobs. It's been estimated, I think, that 3 million people are not eligible for government support grants, and they cannot access furlough payments. And then in turn, they have a long wait often to access universal credit, if then. Now, clearly, this is putting a lot of people in a desperate situation, families and children. It's putting a great mental health strain on people. And, sadly, we have actually seen suicides because of that lack of help and access. And only last week, not in Exeter, but elsewhere, we sadly saw somebody with mental health problems who apparently starved to death because he couldn't access any help for himself. So it's really to get a feel of, I know there's a huge amount of work going on through the City Council and charities, and it's been amazing the way that everybody's pulled together. But I'm still concerned that for various reasons and complex needs, there may still be a number of people in the city that are falling through the cracks, or they haven't accessed the help that is there one way or another. So even when the government hasn't put in the right support, the city stepped up and provided it in a wonderful way, and just to get that assurance. I know we can't always prevent every tragedy, but I think we've just got to be extra careful, because as the chair has said, we are at the eye of the storm again, and things are very serious at the moment and may well go on quite some time. And I think it almost feels worse this third time around. It seems to have been pushing a lot of people over the edge psychologically, which happened before. The third area is the city centre recovery, and clearly the pandemic has accelerated changes in retail that have been long-standing. It's almost put them on a turbo boost, hasn't it? Home deliveries, buying online, not going into shops, etc. And I see all the measures that you've clearly put in, which are all very good, but are we collectively, and I don't mean just the City Council, maybe even nationally, working to restore a model, build back better to what we were before, when actually the reality is we probably will never quite go back to that or at all, because the footfall's changed, the retail habits have changed, and then that inevitably takes us into office space not being used, and then the debate about are we then potentially looking at changes in the planning to reallocate some of the retail space into residential use, which again is not necessarily a bad thing, because if we've got more people living in the city centre, they'll then support the existing shops, I assume. So are we working to the bigger picture rather than just building back to what we were before? Because I'm not sure we're going to get there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hannaford. I'll try and go through those 3 points. So the markets, I think one of the key things we want to do for those wanting to take one of the market stalls is about providing that additional business support and advice. Is that if it's someone who's setting up a new business in terms of that market stall, of how do we support them through that, whether that's business planning, cash flow analysis, or in terms of looking at what products product they're going to sell in for, for the research for the local market. We want to make sure that if someone has recently lost their job and has been made redundant and thinks this is a good idea and an opportunity for them, how can we support them, hold their hand to kind of give them the best possible opportunity to make a go of this? And actually it's their job, it's their career, and it really supports them individually and them as a family. You mentioned Bedford Square for use for markets, farmers market, and extending the opening times of the farmers market. I will certainly have a chat with the officer who's in charge of the farmers market just to see what the possibilities are around this. Looking at the temporary market, if we have 10 stalls or if we have 40 stalls, and obviously that's going to depend on location of where we have this. I'm a glass half full kind of person, looking at the positive sides of it. I want to see this as a success. I want to see a good number of stalls as part of this project and supporting people into a new role, whether that be self-employment. You mentioned around those 3 million people not eligible for government support. There's absolutely people in Exeter who have been affected by this. To be those that have been recently gone into self-employment, so they don't have evidence of backdated accounts for them, and that has restricted them from getting support from central government, and also directors who take dividends, and that's tends to be small business owners who again have a business in the city, live in the city, and have a family in the city, and are struggling with a personal income for that. We have support through the City Council through some hardship grants and also discretionary grants, which are due to go live next week on the City Council website. Councillor Pearson mentioned those. So it's kind of guiding and advising businesses. Information does tend to keep getting updated from central government. So I would advise individuals and businesses just to continuously check the national government website, but also the City Council website for the grants that are being launched. Some of them are very specific for those properties that have a business rates account, so you pay your monthly business rates, but some of them are discretionary, so that is down to the City Council as to who we want to support. And we've been quite, within the policy, it will talk about those types of businesses that it's there for to support. And then the final point was around city recovery. And yes, absolutely, this pandemic has sped up changes within the retail economy. Within point 1 of the update, it talks around changes in retail sale volumes, whether that's a reduction or an increase in that. One of the biggest ones is around textile, clothing, and footwear, which is a big majority of the shops on any high street, not on any high street, not just Exeter. And then you have increases in the food, household goods stores, which tends to be your supermarkets and convenience stores. So again, you can completely understand why there has been changes within on the high street or whether that's online. It will have an impact in places like Exeter. It's just how can we manage that and be proactive as a city and as a City Council to manage that going forward. The amount of businesses working from home is increasing. Whether that continues to increase, whether it changes, whether it reduces down. We're working quite closely with the Chamber. They do a regular business survey now. I think we have the results of the latest survey. I think they came through today, so we're due to get a copy of those very soon. And that impact of working from home, yes, we have reductions in the amount of people coming into the city centre by car, but that has a direct impact of spend within the city centre and has a direct impact on those businesses and the people who work within those businesses. We've been doing some work around that Build Back Better, and that was part of the recovery way back when last summer, that we need to take that into account of the changes that are happening within our city centres. and the recovery groups, especially around the city centre, focused on how do we reopen our city centre, and that was the main primary focus around the city centre recovery group. There were other recovery groups around the visitor economy, around business, around construction. Some of them are still continuing, so it's about how do we support our city going forward. The Livable Exeter works, that has a real focus on city centre, of having more people living in our city centres. For me, that is a real positive step going forward. Having more people living here enables them to coming to our city centres very quickly, whether that be walking or cycling, to spend in our shops, our retail, in our leisure and cultural facilities, but also helps with that shift from that daytime economy to the nighttime economy. So it supports a greater wide range of businesses. Just pre-pandemic, we were working with a local company on developing a new city centre strategy. And it was, looking back, it's ironic now because the draft strategy that we have pretty much spoke about what's happened, but that happening over a longer period, like a 10, 15-year period. But that 10-year, 15 period has happened in 10 months and 12 months. None of us foresaw these coming. So we're going to kind of relook at the draft strategy and actually what as that speed up have changed, how are we going to manage that going forward? So just working with the company over the next probably a couple of months as to kind of like look at that draft, what changes do we need to make just to kind of work with that speed of change going forward. That's it from me on that one.
Thanks very much, Victoria. Before I bring in Councillor Owen, I'd just like to welcome Councillor Packham. Thank you very much for joining us. I know you're very busy at the moment, but really nice to see you. Councillor Owen, I know you've been waiting a while.
Thank you, Chair. I'm patient as ever. Question for Victoria. Victoria, you spoke earlier about pop-up shops, and you said that this primarily involved properties owned by the City Council, and that the situation is rather more challenging when you've got privately owned properties. Has there in fact been much take-up for pop-up shops involving owners of private properties? And if so, in what particulars, or can you give us an example of the circumstances where that's come about?
Yeah. So I mentioned that, we all know that we own a fair number of units within the city. Whenever they become vacant, generally they do tend to get leased quite quickly. So I think that's where the challenge is going to be around pop-up shops, of actually finding that space that we own as Exeter City Council and having it as a pop-up shop. And I think that's why I mentioned pop-ups. And again, primarily that was due to having a lack of available properties that we own as Exeter City Council. People want to be in them, whether that be on South Street, Sidwell Street or 4th Street. There is a want and demand to want to be in those venues, again, which is a really good story to tell, that we're struggling. Yes, we would like to provide pop-up shops, but we're struggling to find a vacant unit for you. We've had a number of shop closures within the city. Some of those is just about those national chains and national brands closing down because it's just not financially viable anymore, such as, we've had the big ones around Arcadia Group. Working with those will be a challenge. We will do our damned hardest to work with those. So if we have a unit on the city centre that is struggling to let, it's a real sticky property, we will work with the private landlord to see what we can do about getting that one up as a pop-up shop.
Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you very much, Councillor Owen. Sorry,
I've got a hand raised from Dave Hodgson, Chair.
Yeah, sorry, I just had a struggle unmuting there and it threw me. Dave, over to you, Dave Hodgson.
Thank you, Chair. Just to provide some context on the difficulties Victoria will face, the leader, Chief Exec, and myself have a meeting every couple of weeks with Mike Carson, who's responsible for our corporate property. At the last meeting, he was saying we have 3 vacant properties, of which 2 are already in the process of being relet, and the 3rd one we want to keep for ourselves to use for another purpose. So that's the challenge. We don't actually have any vacant properties available at the moment, which is good news for the council and our income, but it does make Victoria's life a bit more difficult, unfortunately.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks very much, Dave. I would like to ask a question, if that's all right. You, Victoria, and your team have run some really successful jobs fairs in the past. Now, would it be possible, maybe, you might already have this idea, but looking at universal credit claimants, unemployment's going to rise and probably continue to rise, unfortunately. Have you looked at looking at jobs fairs virtually or physically? And I don't know if you can, but could you target in terms of different age groups jobs fairs? Is that something that you're allowed to do? Or obviously we've got an above national average increase in universal claimants over the age of 50. And we discussed at the chair's briefing that this might be a particularly challenging age group to get back into work or to retrain and things like that. So I just thought maybe a jobs fair could help that. And I know that you've run really successful ones at the Corn Exchange before.
We ran 2 a year at the Corn Exchange. Some of them were themed, some of them were just general. The take up for jobs fairs has been amazing for businesses wanting to be there, but actually individuals coming through the door. We had our last jobs fair, which was, I think it was 2 weeks prior to lockdown, which was the one related around Flybe closing at the airport. And again, we were just astounded about how many people came through the door for that one. I've had some really good successful stories related around that. Building Greater Exeter, which is a construction related project that we oversee, they do a virtual jobs fair once a week. It's kind of mainly a call-in on that. There is the opportunity to do an online jobs fair, absolutely. Whether it's through a virtual platform such as Zoom or some other platform, we could certainly progress with that as part of the Exeter Works programme. We're looking, as I mentioned earlier, we have a website with a lot of information to support people and businesses. We're also looking to have a physical space as part of that. So now we've allocated the funding through the additional restrictions grant. We can have a physical space within the city centre. So we're just kind of dotting some I's and crossing the T's for a location for that within Exeter. When national restrictions lift and we're able to do so, we could have a drop-in facility as part of that rather than a big jobs fair. So it's looking at different opportunities for people who may not have access to IT to do a virtual jobs fair and being able to come in person, but we can certainly progress that option, Councillor Sills.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bialik, I believe you want to come in and kind of update us on some news.
Yeah, very briefly. Interesting debate about the issues, and obviously I've been listening and we will take on board many of the thoughts that has come from councillors. On the question of the market, I have charged Councillor Amal Hussain, and I think also Ollie, Councillor Pearson, to talk to it because it's part of his portfolio now, is of course, when we, which is all but completed, and we'll be at a briefing meeting next week about the bus station, the new bus station, and when it may be able to open, it's all but completed now, we're just commissioning and all that sort of stuff. We will have a site which will be empty, which belongs to us. And for people like me who know about driving buses, there is a big apron on the bus station site. Well, it's ours. What are we going to do with it? And I've said to Councillor Pearson and Councillor Hussain, I'd like you to bring forward an idea that that could be used as a possible market, a temporary, pop-up market or whatever it looks like, farmers market or whatever. You've got facilities there for people, you've got electricity, you've got water, and guess what? We've actually got toilets there as well. Yippee. So we'll be absolutely fine. So that is our property. So we need to look how we can use that site in a temporary way until such time we begin to work up proposals for what I regard as the remaining bus station site, which we are discussing. We're not ready to bring that forward yet, with potential how we bring that forward. As you know, we want rented accommodation there. We want some retail, but we want to bring it back into public use. Some offices, if ever offices come back to life again. And more importantly, public realm, open space, and a agency hub of which the council would move into. That will take some time to work up. In the meantime, we have a temporary site and a potential there. And I think it would be an extraordinarily good idea, far better than Bedford Street. We haven't got to negotiate with Crown Estates or anything else like that. It's ours. We're in control. We are the only people who could fall over if something goes wrong. So I've asked those portfolio holders to look at that. Hopefully they're looking at that, because the day is going to come when we will be announcing the opening of the new spick and span bus station, and we will have a space which we need to use. So I hope that brings some comfort on that point, but let's wait. We'll bring that report back. We will consult about it all, and everybody will be able to have an input, but I think that is a potential answer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bayek. I'm sure that's welcome news to all of us. It'd be really nice to see that site used. And every time I've walked past on my daily constitutional walk, it's been really nice to see the progress there. Despite a pandemic, it seems to be all going quite well. But you seem to have some more news in the coming weeks on that. So we look forward to hearing that. I can't see anyone else wishing to speak on this item. So what I'm going to do is I've got two recommendations which I'd like to propose from the floor. The first one is to support the work of the business support team, Victoria's team, and the new business support initiatives as referred to in note 7, just to make it really clear that we support the work of the council and encourage businesses to apply to those grants. That's the first recommendation.
Happy to second, Chair.
Is that a user seconder, Councillor Hannaford?
Yes, happy to second.
You make me do it.
Oh, thank you very much. Would anyone like to comment or debate that recommendation?
Chair, could we just perhaps also note our thanks and appreciation for the work the staff are doing across the council in all these areas?
Yeah, so maybe we can do. Why don't we do two recommendations? One to support the work of basically all our council officers during this time, which does go without saying, I suppose. But I think as councillors, we feel a bit distant, don't we, at the moment from officers, and we'd really like to put on paper our support for their work. So definitely,
yeah.
Let's take that as the first recommendation, and I'll take you as a seconder for that. Is this making sense, Sharon and Mark? And then the second recommendation will be to support the new business support initiatives as outlined in note 7 in the report. And I'll have
happy to support that, Chair.
I'll have Councillor Newby as a seconder for that. Any comments or debate on those recommendations?
Yeah, I don't know whether there's a way of it also encapsulating what the leader has just said. I know it's at the early stages yet, but again, clearly a lot of thought is going into the issue of markets, and his provisional announcement tonight is very welcome and timely, and I don't know if there's a way of actually encapsulating that as well, because clearly he and others on the executive are mindful of everything we need to do and are clearly in the process of doing it. And I know it's at an early stage, but I feel quite strongly that we ought to at least tacitly recommend that or support it in some way tonight.
So,
Chair, I'll obviously include all of these comments in the minutes. I don't know if you just want to keep the recommendations tight, or you do want to include that.
Happy with that, Chair.
So yeah. So we'll keep those two recommendations, and that'll be noted in the minutes. I was only going to have two, but two have turned into three. I mean, this is what democracy is about, isn't it? I would like to propose that we actually set up a city centre recovery group, and I've discussed this with other councillors and Victoria, because I think it would be nice to look at the kind of medium to long-term recovery of the city centre. This is going to be something that isn't going away for a while, and I think to have a group that isn't necessarily councillors. I'm not talking a task and finish group. I'm thinking more of a kind of a general public sector group, which I don't know, members might have some ideas on who might be a part of that group, but I thought maybe people like Exeter College, the BID, the universities, key stakeholders in the city centre will be a part of a kind of a medium to long-term recovery group for our city, because it's something that is going to be a long-term challenge for us. So I will propose something like that. I'm sure Sharon and Mark will come up with some decent wording.
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Would anyone like to comment or debate that recommendation?
Chair, if I may, I mean, just briefly, I mean, there's clearly the place board that's been set up at a high level executive level with the leader and the vice chancellor of the university sector. I personally, I would like some focus on issues around, for example, food poverty and some of the more sort of pressing issues, and trying to find a way of encapsulating some of the people that are in a state of flux, from going from one form of employment to another, you know, and just trying to find it from a more sort of how should I put it, you know, immediacy and some of the more the socioeconomic reasons, because we've already got the higher level, and I do think this one ought to be fairly led by members, to be honest, with thanks to Pearson and others. I think that's really important, so we don't have a, you know, we've got plenty of democracy there, so we can feed back in our problems. I mean, for example, I've had problems along Carrick Street, for example, with two women that set up a hairdressing business, and they fell exactly into the category of not being eligible for help because they didn't have 12 months of accounts, for example. So I think as members, we bring something to it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I totally understand what you're saying. It's just what you've said would make the recommendation very different. The one I originally proposed. If anyone else would like to come in and kind of help out, this is always quite creative, this part, create recommendations. I mean, I'm happy to have another one. If you were thinking more of a task and finish group, I can see councillors shaking their heads. So I'm going to go through the list of who I've got speaking. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Councillor Sills. I think maybe something should link up with what Victoria was talking earlier about in terms of the city centre strategy. That might be a focus to go. There does seem to be a lot of different groups going on, and I do think then we need to make sure that whatever goes on fits in with other things, and that it is operates in an open way, so that other people who aren't involved and don't need to be involved but know what's going on and how things feed in. And you know, because the city centre covers my ward, which is also your ward, you know, local members do need to be involved in this, because it's quite an important fundamental issue, really. So that's what I would suggest, that it does link into any review of that city centre strategy.
Thank you very much. Councillor Newby, I'll bring you in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think where Rob's coming from is a great idea. I think we could do with a group with officers' involvement and portfolio holders to oversee the whole of the city and the issues that are going on in each ward, not just the city centre, because at the moment we're talking about the city centre's recovery. And I also feel that we should try and engage with those groups that have been through this pandemic, of like All Brits, rallied to the cause, have done food buckets and such like, that we consult and talk with those, because they've been at the sharp end. They've been helping people out on low incomes with food and other such things, hair shampoo and other bits and pieces. So I think if we just focus on the city recovery as one group, and then possibly look at another group to oversee the rest of the city, I don't know if my colleagues would agree. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Newby. Sharon, did you want to come in?
I don't know if Victoria want to have any thoughts on, you know, having the various groups. And,
yeah, I mean, I was going to have some steer from officers. I've also got Councillor Pearson. Sorry, bear with me. Are you a member of the committee, Councillor Pearson?
I'm not a member of the committee.
Pearson is the portfolio. I wasn't anticipating too much involvement in the nicest possible way of portfolio holders.
Very good, tricky.
In terms of the.
I'm happy for you to come in for kind of point of information, but you can't really play a part in the debate necessarily. Councillor
I
Pearson.
think it's a point of information.
Yeah.
So I think I won't refer to Councillor Hannaford's suggestion because I've restricted to the city centre. We've obviously had city centre recovery groups previously, so I think it's really when you're framing this, I would suggest framing it in a way that supports the work of those groups rather than maybe repeats them.
Thank you very much. That's really useful. David Bartram.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I just think it's really important that the groups are focused. So we had a very successful city centre group, which was had most of the people that you've already mentioned, which was running throughout the pandemic, which was focusing on the immediate issues. And the natural progression for that group would be now to focus on the medium to longer term issues. So I think we've already got the people that are actively engaged, and we could call on again to join that group and have members represented there as well. So I think it's really important that keep the groups focused and use the people which are already actively engaged.
Thank you, Dave. And I believe that John Laramie is chair of the Place Board City Centre Recovery Group. So maybe this recommendation can slightly change to support the work of that group in looking at the medium to long term recovery of the city centre. Does that make sense to members? And I can see Victoria nodding. Victoria, do you want to come in?
No, I think just to kind of reiterate the point that Dave mentioned there of having a real focus on the city centre, and I like the point that Councillor Morse mentioned around having that focus on the city centre strategy going forward. You know, we do have that draft strategy. It will need some changes and will need some tweaks because of the speed of transition that has happened. So having a focus on that, I think, would be a really good idea going forward. You know, the impact of Brexit and the pandemic on the city centre, but it's also, as we've kind of highlighted, it's been that wider city as well. I think there is still some merit of having something around the wider city because of, you know, there have been some positive impacts of people shopping more locally within their neighbourhoods and people wanting to open up different and new businesses within their neighbourhoods. But it's kind of, you know, quite rightly highlighted tonight, those new businesses have not been able to access government support because they don't have 12 months worth of accounts to get the support that's needed. So I think there's still some merit of having a wider engagement with ward members to find out, you know, kind of what's happening within each individual ward. So, you know, we could easily do that, you know, by email or by virtually. You know, that's not too much of a great issue. That's quite simple to do, I would say. And sorry, just one point I've thought then is the business support measures that I've highlighted in the report. That does cover the whole of the city. It's not just city centre. So, you know, if we're having a bit of an issue down in Cowick Street, it's about how can we ensure that those business support measures do support businesses down in Cowick Street, down in Herefordshire, not just within the city centre.
Thanks, Victoria. So I think we've kind of moved that recommendation into generally supporting the work of the Place Board Recovery Group in looking at the medium to long-term recovery of the city centre, because we're always conscious not to kind of double up on work. I'm happy to kind of draw it to a close and take a vote on the 3 recommendations we've got before us. If Sharon, do you have any wording for us for each one?
Just in terms of the first one, it was, I suppose it's noting really, or thanking the staff for the work. I mean, I'll flesh it out more at the in the minutes, and how members appreciate that. And I had a seconder for that.
That was, yeah, Councillor Hannaford was a seconder for that.
Councillor Hannaford from seconder, and then support the new business support initiatives as referred to in the briefing note, and Councillor Newby supported that. So seconded that.
Brilliant. So I'll take a vote on the first.
Okay.
I was going to
we'll do the first one first. Yeah.
One by one. So all those in
happy
favour.
with a show of hands?
I'm happy with a show of hands. If people can do it physically, it's a bit easier than counting yellow hands, I think. All those in favour of supporting that first recommendation then, which Sharon has just read out? It's unanimous, I
Thank you
believe.
very much. Thank you. And then the second one, supporting the new business support initiatives as referred to in the briefing note at paragraph 7.
All those in favour?
Lovely. That again looks unanimous from the members of the committee. And then finally, just finding some wording about supporting the city centre recovery group. And I know there was a lot of things were said, and I've obviously noted them down. But in principle, supporting the city centre recovery group. I know there was. So really, it's mostly that. And I had a seconder for that.
Who was a seconder for that? Sorry, you'll have to remind me.
I'm just checking. I had a seconder for that before we vote.
That was a question. Do I have a seconder for that recommendation? Councillor
Newby, thank you very much. So if we could just vote on that, please.
So all those in favour of that recommendation?
Thank you. And that's again, the members of the committee have voted. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's actually really nice to kind of vote on something that's come from a scrutiny committee again. It feels a bit more normal, doesn't it? So thanks, everybody. And thanks very much to Victoria and to Councillor Pearson and to David Bartram for their contributions. It's been really useful and really nice to have a report to get our teeth into, I think.
Thank you. It's nice to see you all.
And you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So we now move to item number 8, and we normally see Director of Finance Dave Hodgson a couple of times a year, and we're really pleased to see him virtually this year. And Dave is here to present the report that was actually considered by Executive last week on the 12th of January. This is the budget strategy and medium-term finance plan. So, Dave, if you'd like to introduce your report.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure all councillors are always delighted to hear from me because what I usually say is not always positive. So thank you, and I really welcome the opportunity to present the budget strategy to you tonight. For information, I think as the Chair mentioned at the start of the meeting, you're getting the opportunity tonight to ask any questions. In a few weeks' time, the main budget report will go to customers focused scrutiny, and I think that's really important because as I take great pleasure in reminding you all have the legal responsibility to set a balanced budget. So I think it's really good opportunity for you to ask all the questions you want, so you feel ready to take that important decision on the 23rd of February. So in terms of the report, this is exactly the report that went to the Executive last week. January is quite a fast-moving time for the budget, with information coming forward. Unfortunately, this year, the information that's in this report is still relevant now. Nothing new's come out. Somewhat frustratingly, but possibly understandably, the final settlement from government is not expected until February. I don't think it's ever been in February before, maybe once previously. So that's going to be really late. If there are changes to the provisional settlement, they will literally come out after the executive papers have been produced and published, and possibly means some recommendations may need taking on the night. I don't think we've ever had to do that before. So we are truly in interesting times financially. I'd just like to go through the key points of the provisional settlement, because they're what form the strategy and the funding that we've got available. So as members will be well aware, the pandemics meant that we've had a 1-year comprehensive spending review from central government, which means we have a 1-year financial settlement for local government rolled over, and we're hopeful that the comprehensive spending review next year will give us a longer term settlement. So for Exeter, we received a new lower tier services grant this year. It's a one-off grant introduced by the government and is given to all district councils and unitary councils that run lower tier services. Exeter received £228,000. The reason for this grant, partly, is to ensure that no council has a negative core spending power a decrease in their core spending power. So core spending power is a figure that's used by the government to assess what they believe the council is able to spend. Nationally, the government have announced that the increase for local governments is 4.5%. Actually, for Exeter, without that 228,000, we'd have had a negative core spending power this year, and that's because new homes bonus has reduced from last year. Now, the core spending power assumes that all councils increase the council tax by the maximum that they can. That is a decision for you as councillors on the 23rd of February as to what you set the council tax for. But just for some context, in order for Exeter City Council to have the same amount to spend this year as we had last year, we would have to increase the council tax by £5. So that just gives you some context to the decision you're taking. So new homes bonus has reduced from last year, but actually is more than we were expecting in the medium-term financial plan. So we were expecting to only get 2 years worth of legacy payments this year. Actually, we've got a third payment, a payment relating to the houses built during 2020. So more than we were expecting, but less than last year. The government have still said they're committed to replacing new homes bonus, so we're expecting that to drop going forward. In terms of business rates, that's one of the big outstanding areas for our budget for this year. So in order to set the business rates, we need to do a return to the government called the NNDR1. In order to do that, we're reliant on our software providers to do an update, to make the changes that the government have announced, and that's going to be done this Friday. So that's a big caveat to the budget strategy, is that we don't know the final figures for business rates, and of course, given that we're in a pandemic, there is the likelihood that will be less than we anticipated. The medium-term financial plan before you does build in quite a drop in our business rate income, but we won't know until next week what the actual final figure is. As I mentioned on council tax, the council tax referendum principles set by government are that district councils can increase their council tax by less than 2% or £5, whichever is higher. And for Exeter, £5 is higher than a 2% increase. The budget strategy assumes the increase of £5, but as I said, that's your decision on the 23rd of February. A £5 increase, along with the surplus we have on the collection fund, will raise an extra £174,000. Normally, in a normal year, our tax base would rise by around 1%, between 1 and 2%. This year, we've had a rise of 29 properties, which gives you an indication of the economy as it stands. The only other key thing I want to point out is for the medium-term financial plan, and you'll have heard me say this before, whilst this year we've had a rollover settlement, the government are still committed to resetting business rates. They're committed to replacing the new homes bonus. Those two actions will have a significant negative financial impact on the council, and councillors have to be aware that we need to save £6 million over the medium-term financial plan, including 3.3 million in 2022-23. So as I've said to councillors before, councillors need to start thinking in the context of what we can afford to do rather than what we want to do. And we need to start identifying those savings now. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dave. Always nice for you to cheer us up at the end of a meeting. Now, you're used to this. Sometimes councillors are a bit quiet after your reports. But does anyone have any comments, questions? I can see Councillor Jemima Moore.
And Councillor Owen and Councillor Diana Moore has her hand up.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Chair. This potentially is an ignorant question, as I don't really know a huge amount about council tax and how it works, but would it disproportionately impact people who are on lower bands to charge £5 rather than do it as a percentage?
Thank you. No, that's a good question. No, so when I talk about a 2% increase or £5, £5 would be the increase on council tax. It would impact proportionately for lower bands. So a band A property would pay 6/9 of the £5 increase. So nobody would be impacted disproportionately. It would all be in proportion as normal.
Thank you, that's good to know.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Owen.
No, actually, sorry, my apologies. I misunderstood a message from my colleague. Councillor Owen's dropped out, unfortunately. So Councillor Diana Moore is next.
Thank you. Councillor Moore.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, and Dave knows my questions because we've had a correspondence before. I just have a clarification, please, on Appendix 2. Can you explain what the Section 31 grant relates to? And is that money carried forward into next year, and will it be spent in that year? So that's the first question. My second question, which we've discussed previously, but I would like to know because it identifies in the report that the budget on climate change is ending this financial year. So I want to know, in the planned budget for next year, are there any funds dedicated to both taking forward the council's own carbon reduction plan in-house and also the council's the areas that will fall under the Net Zero 2030 plan? So, and I'm particularly interested, in wanting to see a focus on attracting external investment to the city and to the council, and also working with communities to raise investment to take forward the carbon net zero carbon plan. So that's of a concern to me that there isn't any revenue budget. And the third issue, I understand that in 8.4.3 of the report, it talks about the interest earned from the council borrowing. So quite a lot of that is reinvested in the council's commercial projects. I think it would be a really interesting topic for this scrutiny committee, Councillor Sills, if perhaps we could have some sort of future scrutiny on the performance of the council's commercialisation projects and see if how they performed against forecasts and look at areas for developing in the future. And this could then relate back to the issues around tackling the climate emergency that I've mentioned. So learning from the experience of officers in delivering projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Again, they're really good questions. So I'm going to try my best to answer the Section 31 grant without getting really technical. The Section 31 grant set out in Appendix 2, £16.445 million was the estimate of the money that the government would give to us to offset the impact of them not requiring retail leisure and hospitality businesses to pay business rates this year. So that's the impact on Exeter of the government providing relief to those areas for their business rates. What it does, our business rates, because it's collected for ourselves, the government, Devon County Council and the fire service, we keep it in what's called a collection fund, a separate fund that's supposed to balance to zero. That that fund at the end of this financial year will end up with a huge deficit on it of hopefully around £16 million. So we're going to set aside that Section 31 grant to pay off the deficit, which we'll have to pay next year. So the Section 31 grant relates to business rates. Unfortunately, it will be spent on covering a deficit that's raised. The intention of that is to mean that the resources we were expecting to receive from business rates this year, we will receive in this year. So that's the impact of it. But they're huge figures, so I had to include them in the assessment, because when you get to the outturn, you'll see some very odd figures, very unusual figures for the council. So I wanted to kind of put them in front of members beforehand. Overall impact, hopefully zero, but significant figures for us. In terms of net zero, you're absolutely right. Last year we had a one-off £50,000 set aside to undertake some very specific targeted work in terms of net zero. At this moment in time, there's nothing specific for the overarching net zero project in the budget, but obviously we still have the corporate energy team who are doing some very targeted projects relating to the council, and we continue with the HRA's work in piloting some retrofit work. Dave Bartram has responsibility for leading net zero and has been tasked with identifying what resources are required to help deliver that project, and that work is ongoing. Probably ongoing because, as members will recall, I've put out a very straight call to you that we can't afford to just bring things to council that are unbalanced. We need to identify the funding. We're in a position where we're looking to save £3.3 million, so it doesn't make any sense to come to council to ask for money from general fund balances. We need to identify how we're going to fund that. So I hold my hands up that I've added in extra layers of complexity. I don't know, Dave, whether you want to say where you are with that proposal at the moment, but
yeah, happy to. So we've started looking at different options for how we deliver or create a team to help deliver the net zero ambitions for the council. We've consulted with the energy team because they obviously form a large part of that. They're an existing resource that we want to expand and develop on. We've got a couple of different options, so I'm just in the process of discussing those with the portfolio holder. Once they're happy with those as a proposal, we will put them forward through the committee process as normal and seek funding. We will have to obviously balance that off against the impact it has on the budget, so that's going to be the challenge. So I'll be talking to Dave about that and the portfolio holder and seeing how we can fund that.
Thank you.
And what I'd like to say in addition to that is clearly this is a corporate priority of yourselves. So this is not me saying to Dave and to Dave's portfolio holder, you should be identifying the savings to fund this. This is a corporate issue. It's for the executive and SMB as a whole to resolve, in my opinion. Because this is a corporate property corporate priority for the whole council. And then your third question, I think, is probably for the chair. It was a recommendation to look into the commercialisation. From my point of view, and just I did have a conversation with Councillor Moore this afternoon. For your clarity, it's the wider sense of commercialisation, so it's what we've borrowed for. So it's not just the specific commercialisation projects within Dave Bartram's team again. It also covers Exeter City Living and other areas where we've borrowed to hopefully generate an income. So that should help you to determine whether you want to take a report.
Thank you, Dave and Dave, for your responses.
Could I come in?
Yeah, I was just going to respond to the last. I would, if I could, I would do what you've asked, Councillor Moore, but we have to go through the scrutiny programme board, of which I'm a member, and Councillor Packham is the chair, and she's also here this evening. So if I were you, I would get some wording or some suggestions in writing to both Councillor Packham and to John Street, so that when the scrutiny programme board next meet, I believe we're meeting later, or it's in February, I believe, we can discuss the work of scrutiny over the next few months, as we always do. That would be really useful, because we're always looking for suggestions. Councillor
Through
Hannaford.
you, Chair, I've also obviously made a note of that in the minutes as well.
Thanks, Sharon, that's really useful. And I could see Councillor Packham nodding along, which is great. Councillor Hannaford.
Thank you, Chad. I didn't want to butt in, but you sounded like you were summing up then for the you were summing up for the conviction. So I thought I'd better just jump in. A couple of points and questions, really. We know, again, I think, ahead of the budget debate and the whole budget, and we're obviously in the budget setting process, is again, we're placed in an impossible position, because on the one hand, we know that council tax is a regressive tax. It hits those on low and fixed incomes. We know, we've certainly got it in West Exeter and across the city. We've got a lot of older people in particular that live in not really very big houses, but because of the property values in Exeter, that affects council tax, etc. So, it does affect people. But on the other hand, we have little option but to raise it as we can to protect the frontline services and what all the good work, including the good work that we've heard just now. But it has been described this time around as a council tax bombshell, and should we as local councils really be forced to perform business as usual by putting up council tax, surely there should be an extra sort of smoothing grant from central government to help us, rather than just the expectation that we're going to put it up again, which brings its own problems. So I think, now maybe flag it up now, but further on into the debate as a council as we go forward, and I'm sure the leader is making those representations through the LGA and elsewhere, but I think we need to say them as well, that we do have a concern that it's not business as usual at the moment, because we're in the worst national crisis since the Second World War. I've got a question for Dave on future proofing and modelling in terms of the collection rates of the council tax. I think clearly you'll do your best, but as you've said yourself, Chair, sadly unemployment is likely to continue to go up, and that will inevitably affect our collection rates and benefits. And I think I'm hoping that it isn't as bad as we fear, but clearly if it is, what is Dave's view on that? And thirdly, I hope Dave will take this in the right way, but I read the report carefully, but I do really feel quite strongly that he needs to add something in to every single one of his reports that he puts to the council. And that is namely, how much funding we have lost since 2010 because of the austerity, both in percentages and figures, because that is the overall context of this budget this year and all of the budgets that we've been trying to grapple with, because, and I think that needs to be built in, Dave, to the narrative, because, it's had, for us and other accounts, it's had an absolutely devastating effect on everything that we do, and including, particularly at the moment, the most vulnerable in society. And I do actually think, and it's gone beyond that now. I mean, I'm work somewhere else that's dominated by another political party, and they're fed up with austerity as much as we are, almost as well. So you know, I do think that context needs to be put in there, because I do sometimes think with all the cuts that we've had since 2010, you know, it almost feels like, you know, we're working miracles in Exeter because of all the good things we're doing, despite the massive chunk of funding that we've lost, Chair. So I just do think we need again to flag that up. And sorry, David, take that as a creative criticism, but I do think we need to keep saying it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hannaford. I mean, I would be happy to, as a recommendation, actually, that we look to put an update on council, basically loss of income at the bottom of every. Dave, you can advise us on this, but you could tell us the report that it would best go to. But I think that would be quite a nice thing to vote on, actually.
Happy to propose that, Chair. And for the record tonight, would Dave have those figures available for the minutes today, please? Sorry to put you on the spot if you haven't.
Over to you, Dave.
So, thank you, Councillor Hannaford. So, in terms of the recommendation, I don't think you need to put a recommendation. I'm quite happy to add some context into the main council budget report, which will go to full council. We'll go to the executive and then on to full council via customer focused scrutiny. That's absolutely fine. In terms of the figures off the top of my head, no. I did present them to members on the 6th of January. I will get the slide and I will send a copy to Sharon so that she can include it in the minutes for your information.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. Excellent. Well, I'm always conscious, more so on Zoom, that it actually is more draining, I think, to stare at a screen than it is to be around a table. So I can't see any other hands. So I would just like to, I am going to ask that we all vote on noting this report. It's something I think Dave's put a lot of work into. So if we could all please, I'm going to propose that we have a recommendation to note the report and thank Dave for him and his team and all his work. All those in favour?
Am I getting a seconder? Sorry, Chair. Just
yeah, I'm getting weary now. I should actually ask if there's any debate. I need a seconder and then a debate.
Happy to second, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Newby. Any comments? All those in favour? That's unanimous.
Thank you again of the committee. That's unanimous. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everybody. It's been nice to go back to a more ordinary scrutiny process. Obviously it takes longer, but that's democracy in action. The next meeting is in March, 18th of March 2021. It will be virtual, I imagine. Last thing to say is stay safe out there, keep plodding on. It is getting tedious, but one day we will all be sat in the Civic Centre again, I hope. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Bye.
Chair.
Take care. Night,
Cheers, everyone.